Yeah, that's the good stuff right here. Hard, soft literature. Yeah. I mean, sort of, kind of. I tell you what, I'll check it out. You know, I'm not normally one to destroy books, but so I'm just kind of big for it. Hiya, folks. Fruit and Doggy here to do another book discussion, and today it is on the book Arachne by Lisa Mason. This was from a used bookstore, so that's why it's covered with all of these price stickers. Only paid $1 for it, so figured I really couldn't go too wrong for a used hardcover book for $1. Its page length is just around 260 pages, and since it's such a large book, it's much taller and a bit wider than an average paperback book is. That's somewhat comparable, I would imagine, to a paperback that's maybe 300 pages plus. So I don't know how much they changed the font for these small, for the difference of size of the pages. So that's just an estimate. It's a science fiction book, published, check this earlier, copyright of published 1990. So it's actually not as old as I kind of expected, to be honest. Anyways, to read the synopsis. Excuse me. San Francisco in the future at the Big Quake has become an Escher-esque construction of toppled and teetering buildings, twisted roadways, and eternally jammed traffic. On the cracked streets below, throwback aborigines stalk mirror-chromed robots. High above in the leaning pyramid of Transamerica, young and hungry professionals, hardwired into cybernetic virtual space, push through deals and decisions at the speed of electricity. Carly Nolan is a young associate at the giant law firm of Ava and Rice. She is cool, confident, and ready for the world. But in her first appearance in computer-generated court, her telelink fails, blocking her out for vital microseconds of court time. Humiliated, reprimanded, and in danger of suspension, Carly must find a cure for her strange blackouts and for her hallucinations of a giant predatory spider, or move from the fast track into a state of permanent career gridlock. An unscrupulous senior lawyer named Wolf has an answer. He has access to a dangerous and illicit drug called Cram, which enhances telelink speed and performance. Krober Spinner, the robot therapist, offers another option. Delicate psychic surgery intended to release the hidden ghosts of Carly's unconscious. Wolf schemes to possess Carly's body, but Spinner's price may be even greater. Spinner belongs to an underground network of renegade robots who lust after the transcendence of the human mind. Into Spinner, the ghosts of Carly's unconscious may be a treasure worth killing for. Arachne is an exciting debut novel by a highly acclaimed author of short science fiction. Tightly written, wonderfully original, and with the vibrant urgency of the new and current, Arachne places Lisa Mason at the forefront of a brave new wave of science fiction authors. I am not the best at tracking authors of paying attention to people's names, so I have no idea if this author has taken off or not. I don't recognize her just from her name, Bedoy, but that really doesn't mean anything, especially since her first work was published in 1980. She could have printed quite a few through the 80s, and that would have been in the decade I was born, so yeah, not too surprised I wouldn't have been reading her books at the time. I'm trying to think of how best to summarize the book and my experience reading it. You do, throughout the story, change perspectives. You do get behind the perspective of, honestly, looking at the cover, the two main characters, the female protagonist, and then that one robot that I was mentioning earlier, the one that desired her strange mind and the consciousness going on there. Though you do dabble in a couple of other people's perspectives as well. But they wind up taking the spotlight. I thought that in some ways the robot's perspective was a bit more interesting, because in that perspective, it's like they had to walk a tightrope. Because on the one hand, they had duties to perform, because robots, of course, are to follow human commands. Their duty is to serve human interests. So she has a job to perform, but then also there's some elements of autonomy. They can use money that they earn to purchase different things. They have their own living space. They can do what they want with it. So, excuse me. So it's interesting seeing that balance between dealing with a body that wasn't dealing with organic problems, but still had to deal with problems like going obsolete, breaking down, malfunctions. In order to be competitive with newer models, making sure that there was enough funds put aside for replacement parts. And then also because it's kind of part of a rogue, renegade little force that basically has its own little black market, that desire of obtaining what I'm going to call somewhat like gremlins of the human mind, strange anomalies that when human beings connect to this massive network, because our minds aren't pure electronics and parts, it's chemistry, and all of our strangeness and bizarre thoughts and irrational behaviors and beliefs, it sometimes will create these anomalies that translate into this kind of like avatar state, this electronic realm. And so for these robots, this is the most intriguing, baffling, amazing thing, highly desirable. Because they can't ever make anything like that. They're too rational, programmed, calculated, logical. So that's never going to randomly generate from them. They couldn't make it if they wanted to, is basically the issue. And I found that to be a very interesting issue to tackle, because the robots already have some degree of, I'm going to call them rights, some liberties, some freedoms. So it's not the old can of robots fighting for their independence, for the autonomy, blah, 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 blah. They already have that. But what might be of greater interest to a robot? They have some degree of sentience and logic. They have self-determination. But they have, I'm going to call it somewhat like of an envy. It's like, oh man, human beings are still so strange and novel and compelling. That's a very interesting angle to take when looking at kind of a sci-fi future and how human beings and robots would interact. I think that was a very intelligent take. I really applaud the author for going down that angle. The female protagonist, whose name I have already forgotten, Carly. I was peeking. I was trying to refresh my memory. Carly. I like the story when it, her perspective to an extent, but I think the problem I had, and this is personal preference issue, it's in regards to the tone of the story, because she is very competent, has a bright future. So as a professional, she's on the cutting edge. I'm going to make something out of myself. I'm going to be this great corporate lawyer. Nothing wrong with that at all. But as the story progresses, when it deals with her, I found it to be a little too mean-spirited, some of the events that took place. When she argued a court case, she was, I think at first, before she started taking that drug to boost her performance, I thought maybe she was a little bit more humane. But once she started using that, she became completely cutthroat, totally ruthless. And that was good for the company. They loved it and they applauded her. But the impact it had on other people, it destroyed lives. I think we only get one detailed example of that, but it was very somber and grim. There was no positive side to it. There was no uptick. There was no there wasn't a silver lining. And as the story concludes, there's never, it never goes back to address that particular case. It's never resolved. It's never, let me fix this or try to address this in retrospect, or let me change how I behave and how I treat people moving forward. So that was kind of disappointing, I have to admit, as a reader. And again, that's probably to some extent a personal preference. I have to admit that it's probably, with the setting, the world building that took place, I think it's very realistic. I think that's very plausible. And, you know, I can only imagine how often that would take place in this futuristic world as depicted in the book. But perhaps because I'm trying to stay optimistic while being somewhat of a pessimist, but still I want to hope for, and like I don't want to be stuck in just doomsaying and always going to be the worst and we should always expect the future to go to hell in a handbasket. Like, I think the future is what we make of it, what we invest and shape it to be. I think we have a lot of freedom and control over that to varying extents. But anyways, that's one example. The other would be going a little too spoiler heavy, but there's another event that takes place near the very end of the story that, again, just kind of, it seemed to come out of left field. I think you could see a little bit of foreshadowing. I could have expected some things to go bad, but it seemed to slightly jump the shark. It's like, whoa, that went from could have been bad to just the worst case scenario. It just really caught me off guard, and I thought it was a little too extreme. And again, that's personal opinion and preference speaking. The ending, again, kind of with the tone the story took, some of the mean-spiritedness, it doesn't end in doom and gloom. It's not the worst case scenario by any means in the ending, but it's very bittersweet, and there's not really much of a resolution. I mean, it hints at a brighter future or potential, but we don't get to see it realized. We have no idea what the outcome could be. We just have to speculate. And with such a distinct setting as this, a distinct take on what the future could be like, I find it's very hard to speculate on that because it's so unique. It's so individualized. It's like, I have no idea what this could look like. You know, I have no idea about the bigger picture. I just have this small snapshot image of what the future is theoretically like. So I have no idea what the potentiality could be realized into. So I know I've said many things about this book that could be seen as quite negative, but I wouldn't actually categorize this as a burn it book. I think it has fun ideas. I thought it was pretty well written. I really liked the perspective of the robots. That was a very engaging part of the book. So I think it's a good borrow it book. I think this is a decent example of I think this is a really good example of world building for someone who's working on just a single novel. I can see that I would certainly believe that this person wrote short stories, because they did a very good job. Lisa did a very good job of creating a snapshot of a world, building up in the reader's imagination what this would look like. And this is a single book that you can digest on its own. It doesn't lead into a five-part series and you have to read them all in order to get this overwhelming, that's the right word, overarching storyline. Excuse me. And those can be nice every once in a while. That's how a lot of sci-fi and fantasy book series tend to be. But it's really nice just reading something that's its own distinct, controlled story. That's why you have a front cover and a back cover, because it ends at the end instead of get the second book, get the third book, get the fourth book. But yeah, I would say this is a good borrow it book. I'm glad I got it. I think it was well worth $1. I don't plan on keeping it, but I definitely enjoyed it. And I think most people would. I think at the very least they would have enjoyed parts of it the same way that I did. But that's just my thoughts on the book. I hope you enjoyed the video. Maybe you found a new author that may or may not have written more books. I don't really know. I should have checked. I'll definitely put in more of the author's information in the description. But anyways, I'll see you around later, folks. And as always, fruit and doggy. Yes, there really is nothing quite like curling up with a fine piece of literature, if you know what I mean.